Hey guys, Rex here. Now, before you comment, you might want to watch the entire video. That's just a heads up. But I got a question. Which one of these two views coming from a night vision scope is coming from the $5,000 scope? And which one is coming from the $500 scope, or really $649 MSRP, okay? Which one is from the $5,000 scope? And which one is from the $500 scope? You tell me. Guess. The one on the right is from the cheap one that's under $650. The one on the left, the one where you can't see nothing really, is from the $5,000 scope. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about the uses for digital day-night scope technology. Stay tuned. Hey guys, Rex here. Do you have to spend multiple thousands of dollars to see well in the dark? That is the question we're going to answer here today. The answer is no, not today. I'm going to do a comparative analysis between the Pulsar XP50 thermal imaging scope that I think when they came out, they were over $5,000. You can still get them, but they're at least a few $1,000s now. We're going to look at the TNV PVS14 L3 Gen 3. Okay, that's pretty much standard issue technology for a long time. They're upwards of $3,000. I think they're around $4,000 now. And then we're going to look at the $500 modern option, the Arken Zulus digital day-night scope. And we're just going to show them side by side and compare how well you can see in the dark in a variety of different contexts. Now, all of these different optics I actually own. They all have their place and they all have their usefulness, and in combination, they can work in concert together to be extremely effective. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the electromagnetic spectrum and give you a general idea of where on the spectrum these things are detecting targets. Also talk about the Steiner DBAL Illuminator and how that can work in your suite. If you combine some of these tools, sometimes you can get dramatic improved capabilities when you're out in the field, okay? Now, I'm going to come at this just from a environment control angle, okay? You guys can apply it to whatever you're going to be using it for. So whatever environment you got, let me know below. All right, rock and roll. So first off, we're just going to show you some footage, okay? I'm going to show you here. We're going to do a series of tests. The first test is going to be describe the target details at 36 yards. And then we have 6 total tests I'm going to show you side-by-side comparisons. Here we have the Pulsar XP50 Trail next to the Arken Zulus 5-20. Now, the Pulsar, again, XP50 Trail, I think the MSRP was upwards of $5,000. And the Arken, I think in the last sale they had, and if you guys want to see the links for the best sale that's online at the moment, if you use code REX on your links below, you can get the best deal. But I think they were like $500 total after you use the code in the last sale they had. Even at I think the stated MSRP is like $649 for the Arken Zulus digital day-night scope. Describe the target details at 36 yards. That is not that far. Should be something we can do. Okay, and you can see on the top we have the PVS14. That's giving you a wide field of view. Okay, and on the bottom left you have the thermal, the XP50 thermal for the $5,000 thermal, and then on the right we have the Arken Zulus 5-20. Digital day-night scope. Now, why are we not really able to see the targets in the other two optics, okay? Because you can see the target as obvious as day in the Zulus 5-20 scope. In the thermal, we have what they call a low thermal contrast environment, where everything's kind of the same temperature. That happens a lot when there's moisture in the air. This filming was done side-by-side, shooting at the exact same target. Both of the thermal and the Arken were both indexed to 5.1 power magnification, so they got the same exact magnification dialed in. And of course, the PVS 14 is not magnified. There might be a 1.2 effect magnification on there, or 1 power, just straight. There's no magnification. Can you identify the target and find the target in the PVS 14? This is 36 yards away. As you can see in the video here, without magnification in the dark, when you're just looking at black and green coloration, kind of difficult to spot that real quick, and identifying the target is going to be a challenge. You're not going to be able to clearly identify a target at 36 yards even with the PVS 14 all that well. Let's look at the XP50 footage. Here we have, this is an excellent thermal. If that was a real human that was emitting heat, it would be a lot easier to see, but you would not be able to recognize it, okay? The thermal, of course, has its application, very good at locating targets, as you can see here. You can see and find deer and stuff, so they have their place. But if you're trying to identify a target, which is what we're demonstrating here, identifying a target is very difficult sometimes to do on thermal. You might be able to tell generally what critter you're looking at. It is a deer. It is maybe even a mule deer versus a whitetail, or you're looking at a hog, you should be able to discern that. But identifying which specific animal it is, or if you're looking at other targets where identification will be very important. But you're going to see how it's going to be very difficult to identify the target using a thermal scope, okay? All right, so let's move on to the next test. First out, what we're going to do here is I'm just going to show you the PVS 14 first to give an idea of the area we're looking at here. So compare the vision with bright light reflections. A lot of guys ask about washout. Is washout an issue? So here we see the PVS 14, you can have a very good general layout at 1 power of the general area. So the PVS 14 here is going to be very handy for getting a general orientation on where you're at. If you're trying to navigate, if you're trying to walk around in the dark, if you're trying to see just generally where you're at, if you want a wide field of view, the PVS 14 is going to be awesome. Wearing it as a binocular on your bump helmet or whatever you got is going to be very handy for that kind of stuff. However, for identifying detail on any of those question objects, it's going to be very difficult. So let's pan over and look with side-by-side comparison. Here we have on the left the Pulsar. You can see, okay, we're looking at an automobile, but again, we have a low thermal contrast environment. Some days that car might be glowing white hot, but if it's been sitting for a while and it reaches ambient air temperature and the temperature of everything else around, including the vegetation behind it, it's very difficult to see what's there. The digital day-night scope, you can see a lot more detail. And you don't have the same washout you had with the PVS 14 either with the digital scope. The digital scope is implementing, of course, its programming to be able to balance out the light and adjust all the parameters on the fly so you can have a very good detailed view of the object you're looking at. So digital day-night scope technology is actually very, very good for dealing with things like glare, okay? And as you can see, as we pan over towards the house, you can see a part of it looks like the door handle or maybe an outside light that's warm. And then when we pan over to the window in the thermal, you don't see really anything. All you see is that it's basically, it looks gray like the siding. Why? Because the temperature is right around the same temperature as it is inside the house. There's not a huge thermal contrast between the house and the outside. The glass is effectively the same temperature as the siding. So you have a low thermal contrast environment again, and all you can see is a sheet of the surface level heat coming off that window. With the digital night vision from Arken, you can see here in the Zulus, you can see through the window. You can see that there's a shelf with a bunch of objects right through the window. Looks like maybe a kitchen, bathroom, something like that. And we can see that there's all sorts of items sitting, and you can see through the glass with digital day-night scope. You cannot really see through glass with thermal. All you're going to see is the surface temperature of glass with thermal. Thermal is not going to be affected by washout of visible light. However, you're not going to be able to see through glass. So here again, panning back to the vehicle, you can see into the vehicle. And if there was someone in there, you might see an arm or you might see part of their head, but you're not going to see any of that with the thermal if the window's rolled up. And with the PVS 14, there's too much glare. So you have the best view. You can actually see through the glass at an angle with the digital day-night scope. And you don't really have a lot of opportunity to see what's in there at all with the PVS 14 or with the thermal, okay? Next test, identify two objects at 60 yards. Now we're going a tiny bit farther. 60 yards is not really far, okay? So we're going to identify two objects at 60 yards, and then we're going to look into, and we are going to do the second operation, which is to describe the contents inside an open door on a barn. So we're going to try to peer into an open door on a barn with the PVS 14, the Pulsar XP50, and with the Arken Zulus and see what's inside there. So let's look at the view. Here we have the PVS 14. And gosh darn it, when we're panned over here to the left, can you identify the object that is in that field? I really can't. It's right on the transition line between the trees and the ground. You can't really see it enough to make out anything, really. Maybe a fence post here or there. And okay, the second object, what's that? Can you identify what that is? We have looks like a square box of some kind. Maybe, what is it? Chicken coop? Shed? Hard to tell. Can we identify that object though? Okay, can't really. And with the PVS 14, okay, can we see inside the barn door? Well, as you see, the barn is painted white, so that's reflecting the starlight, so that's going to be very bright in the PVS 14. But inside the barn door is shaded. It's very dark in there. So with the contrast and the washout of the white paint on the barn door, you cannot see into the barn door. It's too dark, okay? So let's look with a thermal optic. Here we're looking at the object. Can you identify that with a thermal? Okay, what is that? Maybe a pile of something? I don't know, right? And what's this? Okay, now we have a better view. It looks like maybe a well shed. We got a couple of hoses or something leaning up against it. Some kind of items either leaning up against the shed. Looks like faucets hanging there with hoses. Okay, and you can see that. Okay. Now let's look inside the barn door with the thermal. All right, we have some kind of object, potentially a table of some kind, and we can see the back wall is emitting some heat, so we can see into the barn door good because it is warmer in there on the inside. It looks like the bricks or whatever it is a heat sink, and you can see that. Now let's look with the Arken Zulus at the same exact object, same magnification, 5.1 power magnification. The Arken Zulus could be cranked up to 20 power. The XP50 could be cranked up to a little over 10 power. I think it's 10 power. Oh, now we can actually see the object. It's a pile of bricks. Okay, we can positively identify. I see a pile of bricks next to what appears to be a fence post or some kind of railroad tie. Okay, then we scan straight past. It looks like a folding chair. I can see hoses for sure now. I can see that that is a well shed with hoses coming down off of it. Okay, and I see the hoses laying on the ground, clear as day. Now I'm panning over to the open end of the barn. We have a pretty clear view into the barn. I can see that we have bricks on the inside, and it appears that there appears to either be a table or sawhorses with a bunch of lumber or bricks or masonry or something stacked on top of it. So here, you can do a side-by-side. So look at the Pulsar XP50 thermal and look at the Arken Zulus. Which one can you see better into the barn? All right, let's go to the next test. Observe the path through the trees, okay? So this is going to be the PVS 14. So we can see we're sitting in the exact same position for all three of these optics, doing them right side by side, one after another. So here's the general area. We have we're standing in a clearing looking towards some trees. You can't really get a lot of depth. All you're going to really be able to see here is some trees. Okay, now we're looking at the Pulsar thermal, and I can guess that those are trees. I'm not seeing any kind of path between them or brush or ground cover or grass or anything really. We're panning up and I see some trees here. Looks like the trunks of some larger poplars or cottonwood trees. Okay, Now let's use the Arken Zulus. So let's go to the Arken Zulus. Okay, here we are. Well, looks like we can see pretty clearly with that. We can see grass, we can actually see bushes, we can see twigs that we didn't see any of that on the thermal. None of it. And we're panning up, you can see the bark on the tree, you can see the individual leaves and twigs up there, so you can get a good idea of the layout of the land and the terrain, and you can see enough depth to see that there is, looks like a clearing going back into the trees. So if you're trying to identify a feature from the ground, it'd be very difficult to do that with a thermal, with vegetation, because it all just kind of looks the same. It's all the same temperature, so it's almost impossible to see any kind of depth or anything in there. So as you can see, there are certain tasks that are more cut out for something like a digital day-night scope. If you're trying to see the environment around you and identify your targets, this is very nice to have a digital day-night scope. You can see pretty darn well in the dark. That is the question today. Can we see well in the dark do we have to spend a lot of money to do that? The answer is not really. The thermal has its place. Absolutely. If there was an animal in there, we would have saw him immediately. Okay? But you would have seen that with the Zulus. Test number 6, identify and describe the target. Now at 100 yards. So now we're at 100 yards. We're at rifle range now, but this is not what I would call even close to medium range or even long range. We're just at 100 yards here, okay? I want you to identify and describe the target at 100 yards. Okay, so if you're trying to be as comprehensive as possible and write down the target details, describe what kind of target it is, what condition is it in? Are there bullet holes on it? Is there, what is it? Is there a picture on it? Let's look at it. Okay. So the PVS-14, you guys able to see the target? Can you find it? It's 100 yards away. It's not that far. This is with the Illuminator on. So this is the PVS-14 with the infrared illuminator turned on. Can't see it. Okay, let's look at the Pulsar. Again, low thermal contrast environment. Okay, we have a target right in the middle of the crosshairs, it looks like, but gosh darn it, can you describe that? Is that a IPSC? Is that an actual human? Is that, well, if it was human, it would be putting off light, so it's not obviously human. But what is that target? Can we describe that? Gosh darn it, it's hard to see with the thermal at 100 yards. Okay, now let's look at the Arken Zulus. Okay, we clearly see we have 2 T-posts and either a bunch of other T-posts or reflector posts or sticks or a fence of some kind. And we have 2, looks like T-posts, and we have a IPSC style target between them. Looks like there's old tape and paper stuck to it. You can see all the detail on there at 100 yards with the Arken Zulus. Can you see that kind of detail with the XP50? Not for this test, you can't. Again, if we are detecting animate targets that are emitting their own infrared light in that frequency, and we'll explain that in a little bit how that works and how this can be layered in with your systems. What we're demonstrating here, guys, is that there are some things that are better for some applications than others. That doesn't render the other thing obsolete or useless in the category where it does better, okay? Everything is suited to its own purpose for its own season at its time, okay? And a thermal is absolutely the tool for a job for certain tasks. But if you need something well-rounded where you can actually describe and see what you're looking at, particularly in a homesteading environment where there's property and different items laying around, you would hate to smoke a tool or an automobile or something that was parked there that didn't have a high thermal contrast. And you quite frankly can't see that well with the thermal unless it is warm. If it's warmer than the stuff around it, if there's thermal contrast, you can see it just bright as day. But you're not going to see the stuff around it. What are the 4 firearm safety rules, guys? Okay, what's the last one? Know your target and what is beyond it. Can you know what is beyond your target there with the thermal? Not really. How about with the Arken Zulus? A little better. You can at least see that there's things around it. Oh, gosh darn it, I am shooting right towards the fence. And I know that maybe there's a garden plot behind there or whatever, right? So you're going to be able to see. Let's look at another one. Test number 7. We're going to follow the laser designator to the target, okay? So here we have the PBS-14 and we have the Steiner 9002 DBAL D2 green laser, okay? And that is illuminating the target's downrange. Can you see the target through the PBS-14, or is it overpowered in the dark by the Illuminator? Might have to use a little less illumination here, right? Let's look at it with the Pulsar. All right, guys, how many targets do we have downrange looking through the Pulsar? The Pulsar thermal optic. How many targets are downrange? You guys tell me. Without fast forwarding. How many targets are there? All right, now let's use the Arken Zulus.
You got right on the head.
Digital day-night scope. Okay, wow, I have a larger IPSC in the middle. To the left, I have a smaller one. Up on a 2x4, it looks like we have a couple of poppers, steel targets off to the right, okay? I can see that it is sitting on what appears to be a backstop with a bunch of growth on it, either grass or weeds, on a hill backstop. You could not really see any of that in the thermal. So know your target and what's beyond it. It's a little bit more difficult with the thermal. You might be able to see the target itself very well, but in certain environments, it's very difficult to see anything else that is not emitting thermal energy more than the surrounding environment. So those are the side-by-side tests. Hope that demonstrates that there are uses for digital day-night scopes. Like if you just need to see in the dark, that's a really good option to go. And with the new technology, we have, again, the DSLR style technology. We have back illuminated structures nowadays and the photodiode setup with the longer tubes and the separating walls between the tubes. This is Sony StarViz 2 technology, basically. So it's very well developed and what you could call, I hate using the word, evolved for its application in other industries where they poured billions and billions of dollars into development and research for the technology that is now ubiquitous enough to be affordable in a digital optic. Mind you, talking to a gentleman about who has a lot of different night vision stuff. He does pretty well for himself, and he can afford to buy all the night vision. Talking about the Arken Zulus, gosh darn it, is it heavy duty? Modern circuitry and circuit boards, if you think about it, have been evolved incredibly far in terms of ruggedness since the 1960s and 70s with solid-state electronics. AT&T, when they're constructing the Stanley R. Michelson complex, figured out ways to take the wires in the circuit boards, to fold them in, to solder them in a way that is extremely resilient to shock and G-forces for applications of defense and missile technology. Most of these modern circuit board construction techniques that we have available in our phones that make our cell phones possible, that make this keyboard possible, where you can drop your phone 100 times and it's still fine. I drop my phone like 5 times a day. I'm a klutz. Sometimes, right? They're amazingly tough. Solid state electronics is amazingly tough for how intricate it is. Think about your automobile. It's a driving computer. It's a driving pile of computers nowadays, a modern car. My wife has a newer Honda, and it's like the whole thing's just a bunch of computers. And it's rattling down the washboard road for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles. Totally fine. So think of the abuse that solid-state electronics go through every day, 24/7, trillions of dollars of development poured into solid-state electronics. So I would say absolutely, they're very tough. Now, the same kind of technology you're going to see in the PBS-14 is inherently more fragile. You guys know that have those. You don't want to point it towards a bright light. You will smoke it. You don't want to drop it. That stuff is somewhat delicate. Those tubes are a little bit delicate. They have not been pushed through the trillions of dollars of research and testing by billions of people all across the face of the earth, and children and teenagers and all kinds of people that are, the guy that drops his phone 50 times, that has had a tremendous pressure on the industry of electronics. And when you're looking at a solid state digital day-night scope like the Arken Zulus, it's like a little camcorder. You can get them for very affordable. They have incredible performance, and when you look at the stuff side by side, it's just as good or much better in many cases than a $5,000 thermal optic or a $4,000, PVS 14. Now, we should not get emotional when we hear these things, especially if we've invested into our stuff, but you cannot deny that there is usefulness to digital day-night technology where it fits in. There are some things that are going to be better with the thermal. Again, target detection, but when you're trying to identify a target, the Pulsar is not going to do near as good a job as the Arken Zulus. The PVS 14 doesn't have the magnification you need to be able to see, and it doesn't have, honestly, the processing capability to adjust for the contrast. You can't see into the open barn door with the PVS 14 because it's just analog, okay? So you're not having the digital processing amplifying the image and balancing it out. Where I think tech like this is extremely handy is when you layer it in with your systems. For example, I think a really cool way to roll would be is if you have your PVS 14, use it for navigating. Put that on your hat, put that on your bump helmet, whatever you want to have, and use that for navigating. Use that to walk around. Use that to scan areas and identify curiosity. Once you see something that you think you might want to figure out more what it is, if you can't, you're not going to be able to see the detail with the PVS 14, but you're going to have a good orientation of where you're at in the dark. You can use something like a thermal to detect whether it's living, if you have one, or if you have the Arken Zulus, you can crank it right up and get a perfectly clear view of what you're looking at. And if you layer it in again with something like a powerful infrared laser illuminator, like a Steiner DBAL, okay, you're going to be able to illuminate a target out to 1,000 yards for the Arken Zulus, okay? So there are some ways that a laser designator, when you put a laser designator on your rifle, you can fight very well with it. You can run around. You don't have to even shoulder the rifle to be able to shoot what you're hitting when you're using a laser designator on a rifle, an infrared laser. All you have to do be able to do is hold the rifle however you need to do it, and you can engage your targets with the laser beam. That doesn't work at long range. So if you have something like the Arken Zulus, you can actually identify what you're shooting at with your laser now. And you can still use your laser. It's actually very easy to zero. If you have a laser designator on the same rifle, you have your Arken Zulus, you just simply do a parallel bore zero or just intersect it at long range. You just put the laser onto where your crosshairs are. Done. Whatever distance you think would be preferable. And so then you can use it a number of ways. You use the PVS 14 to do your thing walking around. If you want to point out targets to other guys with other night vision, you can still see it in the Arken Zulus. You cannot see infrared lasers through like something with a microbolometer, which is a whole different wavelength that those detect. I think and we can see in the charts behind me, a microbolometer is only selecting right there, that bandwidth right there in the IR spectrum, okay? And so you're not gonna see your lasers, okay? It's thermal wavelength is a little bit different, okay? But with the Arken Zulus, you're gonna be able to see your laser designator. You can use your illuminator that everyone else is using, and it will work fine. It's a very nice way to layer into your night vision, your existing night vision systems, is to have a digital day-night scope that is compatible with your laser illuminator, your laser designator, and your binocular unit, okay? And if you have a mix of guys on there as well that have thermal capability, they can identify where targets are. You can work together to identify what the targets are. They'll find where they are. You can see what they are. And if you layer systems, you have dramatically improved capabilities. There's not one ring to really rule them all, but if you want to rule the most amount of things, you can look at the science. We have the visible light spectrum up here. You come down, okay? Then over here, you have your infrared light spectrum, okay? So we spread that out here. And there's only a very narrow bandwidth that's available for most of your dedicated analog night vision systems. You shouldn't really run them in the daytime, okay? The Arken Zulus grabs all the visible light, all the way down below 400 nanometers, and you can see everything up into about like 900 plus nanometers range or higher, a little bit, okay? So you have wavelength, like ability to detect, and the sensitivity of that instrument can see a much wider range of light than some of your other much more expensive stuff. Likewise, your thermal is in a wavelength completely higher, a much longer wavelength that is seen here. And I'll show you that. Maybe we'll do on Patreon a more detailed video explaining the mechanics of how this stuff works in the electromagnetic spectrum, where different systems are grabbing their light from. Most of your laser designators too are right in that realm, 850 nanometers for the Steiner DBAL. And I think like even like what do they call them? The PEC 15 is like 840, 850 nanometers, something like that. 835 nanometers wavelength. And so they're all compatible with all those existing systems. Very handy. So the moral of the story is, do you need to spend $5,000 to see extremely well in the dark? Nope. In fact, you can see better in the dark in general with the $500 Zulus than you can with the $5,000 thermal or with the $4,000 PVS-14, especially if you're trying to see anything at any kind of distance, or if you're trying to see anything with any kind of detail to identify positively what you're shooting at and what the target is exactly and what's behind it as well. So for whatever it's worth, I found this helpful. Let me know below. If you're curious on these optics and where to find them, I will share a link below. If you use the code REX at checkout, when you check out, find the little code box, type REX in there. It'll give you the best deal available online at this moment. So check it out. Keep an open mind when new things come out on the market. We are in that age, at that precipice of, it plateaued for a while, but there's certain stuff that with the digital technology is now so commonplace that if a few right guys think outside the box, I just think the market chose to not do it for so long. I just think they simply chose not to do it. I think it would have, people didn't want to upset the market, okay? But cat's out of the bag now. You can get incredibly effective night vision for $500. And I was shooting 700 yards with that thing. I got it. My rifle with the Arken Zulus is zeroed at 700 yards. So it's a long range capable day-night scope, works fine in the daytime. Pretty handy system. Not to have to take stuff on and off the rifle, not to have to re-zero, but to be able to utilize the same exact optic all throughout the day. And then when night comes or twilight or any of that, you just continuously operate and go into the night. No problems, okay? So you can check out the full review I did on the Arken Zulus. I get into detail on all the product features and all that. I will share a link to that in the description as well. You can watch the full review on the Arken Zulus. You can also watch the full review on the Pulsar XP50 if that's something you want to get into. It's a great thermal. It's a very, very, very effective thermal if you have the right environment. I know that where I moved out here now, it's a lot more moist. It's difficult to see a lot of days because of the moisture can cause, especially when it's right around 70 degrees, man, it's hard to see because everything's the same temperature. But in the right environments, you can see pretty good. Okay, and of course, you guys know about the PVS-14. I don't need to talk about or review those. The United States military has reviewed those for quite a while with global, worldwide experience. Very well-respected optic, excellent. Probably the best one you can get for that application. Comment below. Curious to see what your experience is, and we'll catch you up on the flip side. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like. I never ask for that. I always forget. And we'll catch you guys on the flip side. Rock and roll. Rex out.